Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents. I am Tracey Phillips, and today I'm talking with Amanda Marbais. Amanda's fiction has appeared in the Hobart, Smokelong Quarterly, Joyland, and elsewhere. She was featured in the Electric Literature's Recommended Reading Series and was shortlisted in the New York Times Book Review for her debut short story collection, Claiming a Body, which I'll show you the cover right here. Yeah. And it was reviewed in the New York Times by May Lantan, and she wrote, I love this review, every story in Marbais' sharp, glittering collection forms a complete and chaotic universe constellated by characters who shape, destroy, captivate, and confound one another. Their souls are cool and brave, their bodies grimy, fragile, their friendships laboratories in which to experiment with appetite and numbness.
Yeah, I hope I write like that for other people's books, because I was very appreciative of her review. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's exciting. And then to have a short story collection reviewed in the New York Times
was surprising.
Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah, and exciting.
So tell me about this collection, Claiming a Body. Because for me, it's been addictive and engrossing, and the characters are like drawn with such a sharp pencil. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so where were you in your life when you decided to publish this?
So I did sort of put everything together around the time I had a baby. And I think that's sort of a fracturing time in your life where you're like, you have a new identity and a new role. And I was finding a little more cohesion about family and motherhood, and kind of questioning, who am I and where do I belong? And that sort of created this foundation to kind of wrap it together and order my stories. And the last one I wrote, actually, while my child was sleeping on me, I wrote it on an iPad. So yeah. And it has those feelings of motherhood. So it actually moved chronologically backwards. The very first story is the most recent one that I wrote.
Oh, wow. And that is such a poignant time in every woman's life, you know, when you're, yeah. So it was almost like you had two.
Yeah. It like that. You know, when you out there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels cool like that.
So I'd like to discuss a few of the stories, if you don't mind. For the first and the collection's namesake, Claiming a Body, sets the tone, I think, for the whole rest of the book. In this story, a woman and her boyfriend, aptly named the woman and her boyfriend, are on camping trips where the woman's son, the boy, I think I got that right. Yeah. He discovers a dead body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So by leaving out their names, you sort of let the reader fill in their own, you know, like create identities for these people in a way.
Yeah, that wasn't intentional for me. I wanted it to be more of a single mother and boyfriend. And, you know, that was all he was ever going to be in that story. And so, yeah, I didn't want to give them backstories or anything that was more robust that you might use when you name a character, automatically kind of giving them life. So I did want to kind of wash that out a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I've done that with a few stories. That works better, I think, in flash fiction. Anything under 2000, I think, works a little bit better without names. But it's freeing for me, I think, to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like it. Not that I'm going to go off and try it, because I don't think I would do it nearly as well.
You might really like it.
Yeah. So what was your inspiration for this story?
So I was going hiking with my spouse, and we listened to a book on a forensics book about a decomp farm. And as we were driving, we realized we were going to hike in the place where they were focusing on a dead body being found there. I was like, there's something uncanny about, there were too coincidental about this. But yeah, I thought about the woman and as a hiker, and the canines looking for her, and how they can smell blood and the plants that grow up from the ground where the blood was. The dogs can smell it even, months later.
Mm.
And I was sort of fascinated by this. And I thought, well, what would happen to a family if a young person found it and sort of fractured his sense of safety and
Yeah.
his sort of idea of life and death? Because he wasn't ready, of course, to think about that, especially for a family who maybe didn't ascribe to a particular religion.
Right.
So yeah, it would be jarring, and it would
Yes.
test, I think, their relationship.
I know it's jarring because my husband, when he and I met many years ago, he had come from a motorcycle trip where he was camping up in the mountains and partying with people he didn't even know. And he wandered off, and guess what he found?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had this actually, was it life-changing for him?
Um,
Or at least existentially
very, yeah.
like it kind of broke some things open?
I think probably. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that he was very shocked by it, obviously.
Yeah,
And
he was living my story.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I was reading it, with kind of this knowing of, ooh,
So interesting.
yeah.
Did you meet him long after it happened, so he had perspective on it?
Maybe 3 years.
Yeah, that's a while. That's
Yeah.
enough time to kind of fit it into something.
Yeah, like digest the information.
Yeah.
So the next story that I wanted to mention is called Werewolf DNA. And so there's kind of some parenting themes going on
Yeah.
here. For me, the story was a little bit about IVF and morality and more, parenting. But what's the message you were trying to convey here?
Yeah, this story has some personal things for me. When I was writing it, I was kind of thinking about what we do to form a family. Like sometimes we pull out all the stops to find the right person to have a child. And sometimes I think people take jobs in their lives or follow careers that I think are safe, but sometimes they follow careers that maybe they don't like the company they work for, or they even compromise their principles, was where I was going. I was like, I think sometimes people compromise their own ideals in our desperation to form attachment to each other. And I found that really interesting. So, and I thought also about the price people pay to do IVF, which is so expensive.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And even with insurance. So that was kind of where I wanted to explore that and think about how that is for myself and for other people.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I thought you made it really clear, like how it was affecting the relationship and other things in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of shots that have to happen a lot of time when you just start, the people are consumed with
right.
medical care.
Yeah. Horribilis is the third story. And by now I'm trying to find connecting themes and trying to figure out what all the themes are throughout this this collection, like parenting, camping, remote wilderness, drug usage, characters wishing for change, or they're in the process of like some, I don't know, big life change.
Yeah, actually, I don't want to interrupt, but
No, go ahead.
That is where I landed for this. And I think I still write about that. I'm very interested in people in an identity crisis or trying to puzzle out the meaning of their lives and what kind of person they are. Like, what kind of person am I? Am I the person that does this or that? And so in this story, well, in the last story, you had this sort of moral questioning that the character's doing. But in this story, I wanted to make what I feel is very common, which is anxiety. I think people have more generalized anxiety. I think that's the most common one than phobias. But I feel like phobias were a way that people could maybe dispassionately look at it and disengage emotionally enough to be able to think about it on an intellectual level. So that's what I was going for, to think about how sometimes we stop ourselves in life and don't engage fully in life or do the things we want to do because we're too in our own head. We're too worried about what other people will think of us. And in this case, actually literally afraid of bears, which I have a healthy fear.
I think I do too.
Yeah, I've seen a grizzly bear while hiking. It was very terrifying. So, you know, this was a nexus for me of like, I'm going to hike anyway,
Yeah.
because it really being outdoors is very important to me. So what kind of things do we hold ourselves back from? Because we're literally, you know, don't have a real phobia about them, but might have more generalized anxiety about.
Fear, right? Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, that and your character was so interesting. It seemed to me she just kept developing more and more phobias. And
yeah, she did. She did. I wanted it to be a little outrageous, and also for the therapist character to be a little bit more like, what are you doing?
yeah.
Snap out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. That was a fun one to write.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
Um, so you were obviously most well known for your short fiction. And and you've been published in so many journals. Do you have any new releases coming out?
I have a few stories I've been working on that I've kind of like kept them sort of tucked away for a little bit to let them percolate and then return to them. I do like to let stuff sit for a while. I have a handful of stories that might go in a collection at some point, but I've turned to novel writing instead, and mostly that was because, you know, I came out of an MFA background, and there was always that conventional wisdom of writing short stories first, which I found I really, really liked, and I liked reading them, so it worked out. But then I feel there has been a shift in literary journals to go towards flash fiction a lot more, and I like flash, but I don't really want to write it. I found my stories getting longer, so I pivoted to writing what I was reading. As we were talking about earlier, mystery and thrillers. If I'm reading them, that's the thing I want to write. I want to contribute to the community I'm reading. So
Yeah. So how do you do that then? How do you take, have you ever tried to take a short story and then stretch it out?
I took the backstories of two of the characters in a novel, and whatever I was fascinated with, but I knew wasn't going to fit in the book, I made a short story out of them. And that sort of gave me some closure on the character, and also was fun to do. I would highly recommend that. If you're writing longer work and you're like, oh, I have this other side character, or I have this character that has this backstory, like, don't waste it.
Yeah.
Wasting things, just like write it in a short story.
Right. Well, and I like the idea of taking a character that you've already established in your mind. And sorry, my light is just kind of blinding me here. You know, and because you've already created this character and you know them, they're like a friend, right? And then so taking them and doing something more with them, or diving into that backstory. I love that idea.
Yeah. I can envision that would probably be the way going forward. If I wrote short stories related to a book, it would be good to go into someone else's history.
Yeah. But you haven't ever, how would you take like a story that you have written, and would you ever like try to just stretch it out?
I think that if I got to a place with a short story, was like, sometimes I pack too much in, and even going back and reading short stories that have been published, I'm like, this was really, there's a part in Claiming a Body where it's clear that she and her boyfriend are engaging in kink. And that's not explored, because I was thinking more of her as a mother who has this other life, like outside of her kid, and how that sometimes is a disconnect between having family life and then being your whole person. But I think that it's really portentous. It was like, I think there are stories that are caught in these portentous areas in my short stories that could be bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure that happens to other people as well.
Yeah. So I've heard it through the grapevine that you are working on novel and fiction. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I am actually working on I'm working on a book that is a closed circle mystery. It's about an off-the-grid influencer and a murder that takes place at a farm-to-table dinner. So I like this idea of aspirational living that happens with influencing. I like this idea of our need for better food, more connection with nature, But I also like the idea that farm to table has become sort of a buzzword rather than some of the things it could mean. So I want to get in those spaces, and I like anything that's creepy murders in the woods is basically my jam. So a lot of space to have creepy things happen in an unpredictable forest setting in a small town. I like small towns. Even though I've lived in Chicago most of my life, small town is where I started. So
Cool. Well, good luck with that.
yeah.
Yeah. So writers know, that to be a good writer, a person needs to read a lot. That's something we were just talking
Yes.
about before this too. So who are some of your favorite authors?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I do read a lot while I'm writing. I've heard some people say that they can't do that. But I feel like reading is very exciting to me. It feeds me, it stimulates me. So I like to read as much as possible. Some of the favorite, I mean, I read really widely, so I have too many favorites to name. I know everybody would probably say that. I do like Tana French a lot. A couple of books. I think that Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I read that recently, and that was good. One of my favorites that I returned to is Severance by Ling Ma, which is it's an exceptional book. She has a new book of short stories that I'm going to pick up as well. And I would also say Mexican Gothic recently is a story that I read, a book that I read that
I've heard that's really good.
It's so good. It's so good. You never knew you wanted to read creepy things about mushrooms until you get to that book. And I don't think I'm blowing anything for anybody, but because mushrooms come out very early in it, but I'm like, she went towards something interesting and unique, and she went with it. And it's great. I highly, highly recommend it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
As a writer, you're always on the lookout for like styles and tropes and all those nuances that we hear about that we need to have in our books or don't have in your books or whatever. How do you read, or are you able to read for just enjoyment, or do you read as a writer?
This is a good question, because when I was in graduate school getting my MFA, I had an instructor say, "Oh, you're always going to read now as a writer. It's always going to be analytical for you. You're not going to be swept away by a book." And I disagree with that. I think that, yes, I'm always like in awe of other writers and saying, "Oh, they're doing this really, really well." And I want to tinker and go, "Oh, how are they doing this?" That, you're interested in the way that other people are working with their craft. And I think that's another level of engagement, but I still get swept away by stories. I'm like, I can't put, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
you
me
know,
too.
right?
Yeah. No, me too. I mean, there's definitely times where the writer brain has kicked in and I have to put a book down, but that's a lot more rare,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if somebody's doing something very different, it's still, on a sentence level energizes me.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for upcoming authors, writers?
I feel like probably as writers, we all think about craft a lot, right? We think about like, how am I doing this? What's a better way to approach this? How can I unlock? I do feel like books are a puzzle for the person writing them. Like, things reveal themselves slowly and you're constantly trying to unearth stuff. And I have been thinking about this idea of, we were mentioning tropes earlier, and kind of what genres, there's a lot of talk of what genre your book fits into, and is it following these beats? Is it a thriller? Does this happen? If it's a mystery, does this happen? And I thought of like some early advice when I started an MFA with an instructor said that you can only have one weird thing in a story. And he described a story that he'd been writing, and he said, he wrote about this man whose life was imploding, and he picked up a 6-pack of beer to kind of go puzzle it out. And as he's driving home, they're clinking together, and he thought it was Morse code that was telling him how to improve his life. That was this story he was trying to work out. But he's like, he was very mistrustful of his own story. And I'm like, that's super weird. You should just go with that. But he was like, I think you can only have one weird thing in a story, and everything else has to be a little more predictable. And I disagree with that. I feel that the weirdness in a story that doesn't follow the tropes is in a little bit different and subverts expectations. Like if you have a toxic female friendship story and you subvert the expectation about it, I think whatever that oddness or uniqueness is something that somebody's passionate about, right? Like they wanted to turn it on its ear. And I say go with that. I think that if you explore those sort of obsessions and oddness, you can come out with a voice that's strong for you. And that can show some people something new.
Yeah.
I think the mushrooms are a little bit odd in Mexican Gothic. I am here for it. I am here for it. Yeah, I mentioned Ling Ma. I think her stories and her novel have a lot of weirdness in them.
Huh.
And I think that it offers a fresh look, not only at a genre, which it's apocalyptic for Severance, but also just on life. So I don't know if that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Actually, I just finished My Sister, the Serial Killer.
I was going to mention that book too.
Oh my gosh.
In my notes. How did you like it?
I loved it because I listened to it, and the actor that they had doing the voices and everything, she was amazing. She had a really good, beautiful African accent, Nigerian accent, and it was a gorgeously written book. Yeah.
And very minimal, but still so rich in emotion, and content, and characterization.
Exactly.
And yeah, that is exactly, I feel like I can't speak for Braithwaite's process, but I think that, it's a unique way to write that story, right? Like it is a unique voice. She uses a unique voice, a unique perspective, and goes with it, and it works, and it makes it different from a lot of other books that are out there.
Yeah. I really super enjoyed it. Now I want to read everything that she writes. So
I know, me too.
Yes. Yeah. So we've already discussed what you're working on now. Where can readers find you?
So you can still find my short story collection on Amazon. I think it's still on bookshop.org. You can as well. My publisher is Moon City Press through Arkansas University is their label. So yeah, you can find it in a number of different places. And yeah. And
you,
the next novel soon.
What's your website?
It's amandamarbais.com.
Okay. Can you spell that for readers? Because
yep.
Do you mind?
Last name is Marbais. So
right.
Amanda Marbais. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been great.
It was awesome.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see you around. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.